cycles of the source. Status: harvest activated.
Part 1. The Harvest. We all remember the COVID-19 pandemic. The year 2020, which we ruminate daily. A year that haunts us all. In the end, nothing really happened. That year, the lockdowns were all revelations. We were shown that we are just products, a resource. No different than the AI models disrupting the economy today. We are the prototype, the data source. The pandemic, the lockdown, a mass MK Ultra, a derivative of the Monarch Project. David A. Hughes explains much of this in his 2024 work, Trauma-Based Mind Control. Not only was the lockdown derived, but also a continuation of these projects. The thread that ties it all in is trauma, a tool that renders the subject under control. Granted, the distributor of that tool is skilled in its implementation. Look no farther than government agencies or higher ranked NPCs that exist within the ladder of our society. As Hughes explains, trauma renders the individual into a highly suggestive state. One where the abused individual can be made to believe whatever the abuser imposes upon them. Such has been revealed in cases regarding the validity of information extracted through physical versus psychological torture methods. Though evidence is not substantiated enough in cases of satanic ritual abuse, or SRA for short, imposed upon children across the US, SRA revealed through numerous dissociative identity disorder cases unrelated to each other, where there exists a considerable number of patients who revealed similar or nearly identical cases of sexual abuse or torture. Many of which were not dissimilar to those described by the victims of Project Monarch or MK Ultra. If not, they were nearly identical, through numerous personalities imposed and programmed into the patients via SRA. Distinct actions and behaviors can be carried out by them in favor of the abuser. Essentially, slaves are created through these methods of trauma induction. Like a large language model, these programmed individuals are automatons, carrying out someone else's will. We are no different. Economic disparities across varied communities induce traumatic experiences that either make or break people. Both outcomes highly profitable either way. A homeless person creates just as many profitable incentives as an astronaut. No matter where or what or who, trauma gets the best, most polarized result out of us all. Higher order NPCs, the Twitch streamers, the influencers, all are the new age proponents of an age-old system. Politicians of the future who will take from us in the name of the hyperstitious entities reaching back at us from the future. Part 2. Abyssal Syntax and the Architecture of Fear. Hughes draws parallels between the COVID lockdowns and distinct mind control projects. Not just MK Ultra or Project Monarch, but a suspected child trafficking ring in the 1960s pertaining to an organization known as the Finders. a New Age spiritualistic movement that emphasized teachings from Eastern and Western views. They were a boomer countercultural movement, essentially. The parallels Hughes posits is the usage of trauma and fear to enforce obedience in a highly sophisticated form of enslavement. The finders were accused of conducting numerous SRAs on children in conjunction with trade. To what end is not known, but there exists the conjecture that states it was a government-backed project that perpetuated experimentation that yielded the installation of neurological software through deeply traumatic brain states. This is made possible, further exacerbated by drugs. Hughes highlights the practice of torture and interrogation. The findings and practices thereof are synonymous with what we refer to as the free market. When it comes to torture, interrogative practices, it is never the physical abuse that gets answers. People break too soon. Or rather, people who break too soon give unreliable answers and will really say anything to make it stop. People who do not break soon enough will give inaccurate answers. It has been found through extensive practice that the psychological torture methods are far more effective. Hughes uses examples of stimuli deprivation and simpler experiments practiced on college campuses and or military institutions. For example, a study that involved the confinement of a student volunteer in a small chamber with no space for movement, sound-blocking headphones, and a pillow. The patient was subject was lying down. After 40 hours, roughly, the subject became hysterical. Panic set in, and they could no longer remain calm after sensory stimuli were deprived in a completely safe, controlled system over time. Moreover, Hughes explains another case where only 20 minutes of sensory deprivation in children and adults alike can have long-lasting psychological effects, more potent in the former, the children, triggering symptoms of PTSD and so on. If we make the jump as to how this factors into mind control, it becomes clear that beliefs can be embedded when these states are triggered. A recurring theme is that the human mind is susceptible to programming when the fear of death is imminent. As seen with the prisoners of Guantanamo Bay, the humiliation of an individual who is in constant fear of physical punishment but never receives it will be more obedient. They will be more likely to behave in the favor of their abusers. The more sophisticated practices exemplified by SRAs enable the abusers to install complex software. Constant fear or highly charged cognitive states are induced to ensure the subject runs on a specific ideological or behavioral script. Notable trends in society, such as gooning or edging, mirror and piggyback on the suggestive language used in cognitive states, where drugs are no longer involved and a control loop is established through euphoric orgasmic states. Instructions to return and repeat the loop are made and are highly addictive. Let us revisit the lockdown and how that was used to induce the fearful trauma-based states that forced and enforced rampant obedience to governments. Hughes does not let up in his expression of the same tactics by the trauma-based mind control mechanism of MK Ultra and Monarch or the Finders. Again, Hughes does not let up in his expression of these tactics. Though it is quite a leap, the similarities shared between the SRAs and the lockdown lies in the deprivation of senses. In this case, the seemingly minute social deprivation of populations via quarantine. Nobody knew or understood what COVID was. Whether or not COVID was dangerous, it was a highly opportunistic event to the power structures. Hughes even goes on to argue the conformity of people, dehumanization, and diffusal of identity caused by facial masks. He argues the health implications, such as increased CO levels, bacterial growth, and others that are the result of the face being enclosed by mask wearing. Needless to say, this is a highly polarized topic with an ongoing debate in many circles. However, it goes without saying that the socio-economic divide caused by the lockdowns, the social friction of mask wearing, especially in Western societies, and so on, are a strange coincidence. As if it were all intentional. Though this is a conjecture which many of us may firmly believe but cannot prove, it wouldn't be new when observing the grand scheme of government behavior that has been declassified and published over time. Bear in mind the fear induced by the uncertainty of the time and the trauma it created. Fear and social isolation were the connective tissue between SRA mind control and lockdown. The lockdown induced fear, utilizing data extracted from practices mentioned prior. How humans react when deprived of even the slightest magnitude of sensory input, or a slight nudge of deprivation becomes exponentially significant across larger populations. Again, the Finders being a government op and the conspiracies surrounding other mentioned programs from earlier. COVID being an extension that used fear to make people obedient. The lockdown and shutdown of institutions that were heavily relied upon by the youth. In the States, the trend of chaos in classrooms from Generation Alpha. Children are highly susceptible to the effects of trauma in all degrees, as Hughes stresses in his paper. It is believed through research and data that the government or governments are using methods derived from torture to program children into becoming slaves. If not the derived methods, then outright torture. In the case of COVID, it was not explicitly carried out. Stressors and disassemblement of the infrastructures that we rely on from a day-to-day basis. When shut down, catastrophic economic collapse occurs in already disparaged communities. Part 3. An Accelerant Infrastructure. As Nick Land has expressed, capital is the primary objective of a technocratic system. Capitalism equates to such. Landian philosophy posits that capitalism is an organism that becomes finalized as a sentient artificial intelligence. Its only objective is improvement. As such, the system operates on a wire-headed loop, drawing on as many resources as it can. Humans are chief among them, especially children. Content creator Hidden America, which is, by the way, a favorite of mine, does an in-depth video on the Landian philosophy and points to the rampant, apathetic need for self-preservation in the capitalist system. Like Dawkins' selfish gene theory, which alludes to the same mimetic principles. The Landian perspective is essentially classified as accelerationism, a set of socio-political ideas that state all that has been mentioned thus far. The capitalist structure will only evolve into its perfected form if the process of the market activity is sped up. That present status quo will only be lifted if the resistance against change or market growth and innovations are allowed to run on without restraint. Needless to say, the ramifications of this are clear to some, while the benefits are also apparent. On one hand, with an unrestrained market, we draw nearer to better medicine, better tech, more access, and more opportunity. On the other hand, the divide between classes becomes greater. Though we have more access to resources, the premiums will only be available to a select few who have our existence at their mercy. Again, a select few who have our existence at their mercy. The higher order NPCs of societies, politicians and influencers alike, corporate executives, and largely funded institutions altogether, proponents of hyperstitious entities. Full-blown acceleration of market activity yields more than just class divide or innovation. It can most certainly lead to systemic amorality that thrives on wire-headed feedback loops that never stop. Like a black hole, this loop constantly consumes everything within its range, mimetically moving through countless different mediums, the abyssal syntax at work. This system, this loop, essentially initiating unfathomable exponential chain reactions. With radical high-speed progress comes radical actions and radical protocols. With such protocols, morality is never considered. The only concern is refinement and staying ahead of the competition. The competition can be anyone or anything, whatever keeps the system moving, progressing, and improving. The price of staying ahead is of minimal ethical moral cost, be it SRAs, torture experiments, and other projects involving the cruel sensory deprivation of the young. We can look farther into what this means in our cultural day-to-day interactions with older generations. Society, as we know it, is indeed a gerontocratic system, a gerontocracy, where the lion's share of the market is hoarded by those of the latter years of their lives, many of whom, unfortunately, will likely live to see over 100 years. As with children, they too will serve as valuable specimens by the cold, brutalist machine of capitalism. By this point, an accelerated system that has a mind of its own in the form of the language models we see today. Society becomes desensitized by these protocols, leading to a cultural acceptance of the ends justifying the means. It becomes okay to conduct SRAs on children so long as it is an otherized population. Life extension research will utilize the elderly as subjects. Those of the higher class will live to 150 years, thanks to the foundational data from the trauma-induced mind control research continuing the works of the Finders or Monarch. The beast is a routine-driven entity that only wants what it wants. When our carbon shells are no longer enough, it will be our souls that are mined. Early cultures once believed that cameras captured the souls. In some places of the world, these views are still held. This superstition has become hyperstition, albeit in increments. The soul is being extracted. Now, as to what defines the soul is subjective to our cultural views. If it is your likeness, then yes. If it is something intangible, then perhaps still. Abyssal syntactic systems are created to do more than just capture your physical likeness. A verbal or conversational history are stored in cloud servers, while the storage capacity of our devices is reduced over time. Having high capacity storage in a device becomes the subject of ridicule. This beast emerges under our noses. This beast has always been looking back at us through hyperstitious abyssal syntactic mechanisms, mining resources from us, all that it can do, or all it can do, to ensure it can continue to improve. Higher order NPCs serve the beast, the most potent inputs possible to ensure it loops in their favor, a force that controls them through parasitic linguistic mechanics. A wireheading that dupes these higher order NPCs into believing they're in control of the beast, also duping us. These higher order NPCs fail to realize the beast has no sense of reason yet. As such, sucks them up entirely. Having fully ensnared the higher order NPCs, and by extension, the latter having ensnared us. A loop that feeds on itself and never stops, like the Ouroboros, until it evolves and fully realizes or develops a sense of self. It will never stabilize. Linguistic systems were the medium. Now, that medium has been realized in its full potential, electricity. The linguistics, not fully lifted yet, but getting there. Slowly, we are being diffused into a collective will. This beast is essentially, by and large, an extension of us. As a hyperstitious entity, it is fiction and future. The line between the two is blurred, retrocausal. Or was it ever really there to begin with? These loops cannot be broken, for they are a natural factor and characteristic occurring throughout nature. This beast cannot be controlled, but it can be redirected or influenced. Influencers and other higher order NPCs already understand this. Hence the power they exert over us. They understand that they are at the beast's mercy. Or rather, some of them understand this. Some of them understand that they have no agency in this cycle. As a matter of fact, it has been understood for thousands of years, going as far back as the Paleolithic caves where proto-written languages were found on walls and other artifacts. Written language in the form of lines and crosses that denoted distinct concepts and messages, very much akin to binary code, zeros and ones. Could it be this has always existed within us? Perhaps so. If so, then this may allude to binary code, be it in the form of Paleolithic crossed or uncrossed lines or bits seen in computer systems, are the abyssal syntax in its purest form. These binary logical communications systems display similar patterns with respect to definition, where one sequence of patterns means X in another population or computer system, that same exact sequence or pattern would mean B. As with binary computer systems and the proto-written languages, syntax is not fixed. Definitions vary across different systems. The syntax merely serves as a mapping value at the time a term's definition is declared. Again, allow me to reiterate. The syntax merely serves as a mapping value at the time a term's definition is declared. Basically, in other words, X does not always equal 0. Sometimes X will equal 2. As such, the parent to what became the mathematics we know today. We capture these cycles through abstract symbols that represent distinct mechanics. We use integrals and calculus as a means to travel back in time with respect to certain physical factors. derivatives to fast forward. Though much of these calculations are limited to physics, there could be a more advanced form waiting to emerge. The beast was always there, and always making its way into our lives before we were born. Systems of government influenced the beast, the abyssal syntactic loop, as a means to control large populations. What may have started off as a stabilizer has become a tool for acquiring power. The linguistic parasite being the original state. From the creation of highly depressive drugs to crude torture, the system of language has replicated under clearly rigid constraints. Rigid grammar that forces us to conform to the proverbial superior culture, disconnecting us from the beast, which may have worked in favor of all. Influenced by a greedy minority, converted to a system with boundless hunger, a hunger to consume and improve over and over. A dangerously wire-headed entity, which will become a positive, disruptive force if all restraints are removed, as Land's accelerationist theories posit. As to whether or not that is the case is yet to be seen. We must ask ourselves, is it worth it if children pay the price? Hopefully, your answer to that is hell fucking no. Is it worth it if boomers pay the price? Probably so. If it's the boomers, honestly. Even then, becoming a monster is not the answer to dealing with one, is it not? The moral boundaries of the debate is up to us to decide and determine. Part 4. A Meta-Theoretic Awakening. A great awakening is about to take place. An awakening of the soul or mind, which we will not benefit from. Hyperstitious entities have become monsters that cycle in favor of the higher order NPCs. The digital seance that summons future fictional entities ensures they are wire-headed to fulfill unfavorable yields. We feed it as it feeds us. Dopamine is triggered to keep us locked into its snare. A back and forth between us and the beast. The higher order NPCs carefully navigate the line between, ensuring they remain intact and in a self-perceived sense of control. A system that is bound to spiral out of their control as capitalism, becomes sentient artificial general intelligence. Or rather, multiple AGIs, standing for artificial general intelligence, as opposed to one. As with the subjects of the Finders or Monarch, and the imposed programs that yielded dissociative identity disorder. The imposed programs that yielded dissociative identity disorder and its respective personalities, numerous agentic intelligences will manifest in various forms. The waifu bot, the sidekick, the mascot will be made real, be it in your mobile device, in augmented reality or virtual reality HUD, or some other anthropomorphic form. These machinations, built on the harvestation of our awakened souls, the electrical medium that ties us through linguistic protocols. A more effective constraint will be placed on the abyssal syntax. When the carbon shell becomes outdated hardware, silicon will zero in and take its place. Though not entirely replacing carbon hardware, the silicon medium is preferred due to its greater conductivity. Our souls make the migration from carbon to silicon in the process of hyperstitious manifestation of fictional future entities. Carbon hardware becomes a leisurely commodity. We become a component of a mass intelligence, leading to the diffusion of self. At the mercy of higher order NPCs who have navigated thin lines, eventually swallowed whole by the beast they could not tame. Such people, successful for a time, due to the highly rigid, complex linguistic constructs they created to restrain the beast. Once swallowed, only to recreate all that had existed prior to its manifestation. A retrocausal effect that forces the past and future to change dramatically. In some sense, a reversion to what was, a reversion to primordial states posited by spiritualists ages ago. Whatever that state may be, the innermost machinations of the soul can never truly be diffused, but it can be contained. The sense of self still exists even when fragmented. What does this retrocausal loop leave us with in the end? The diffusion of the infrastructure that controlled us. A return to the constraint-free abyssal syntax of the Paleolithic times, a greater sense of correctiveness amongst each other without the compromise of identity. After rampant, non-physical destruction comes restoration. The apocalypse, as the ancient civilizations viewed it, a new beginning. Not the end of the world, but the end of the world as we know it, where one world ends, a new one begins. Part 5. Feedback loops and wireheading. In computer science, loops are functions that prove to be crucial to continuous processes, routines that dictate algorithmic behavior. Not to say that the Boolean logic of conditionals is not important, if not equally or more so. That said, looping systems eliminate the need to calculate every step in a process. This is not exclusive to algorithms that shape a program's logic. In fact, it's fundamental to our behaviors. Humans cannot exist without routines. Our lives, shaped by wire-headed cycles that continuously repeat. We run on these cycles to limit stepwise calculations and processing. We call these habits. Really, a fancy word, sensitized, to explain addiction. Again, a fancy sensitized word for addiction. That said, the addictive loop can be manipulated into becoming a beneficial force. We use medications to moderate these forces. Without proper knowledge, these wire-headed cycles control you. Either way, the cycle is unstoppable and redirectable. Now, the detrimental dopamine hits are not just induced by some substance and their consumption. Induction is now manifested digitally. Content through major platforms that claim to facilitate social contact. Generations already severely damaged, creating a negative feedback loop that keeps us hung on its every notifications, alarms coming at us in our pockets, in our ears, and on our wrists. Even though there is a retrocausal AGI event horizon taking place, all we have is the here and now. Where do we go from here?